Hello, people. Welcome to our webinar. We're going to give a minute for people to get joined on. I see a couple people coming in here. Today we're going to be talking about annual stewardship campaigns during our pandemic, coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. It's wreaked havoc, and yet there's a lot of things that we still need to move forward with promoting annual giving and keeping our operating budget good to go for church ministries and facility costs and everything that we need to run our parishes and our ministries and our churches. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, specific tips and advice about running your annual stewardship campaign during COVID-19. We're going to talk about what things have changed, what things haven't since the pandemic hit, and share a lot of success stories along the way as well about some of the churches that we've been working with in the midst of social distancing and the shutdown, folks who we were in the middle of a campaign with, whether that's a church capital campaign or a stewardship campaign preparing for a church capital campaign. We're going to talk about that and what we've been successful with those churches today. And along the way to lots of the principles of stewardship that are tried and true for us in our approach to raising funds for the church. It's not a secular model. It's a stewardship mindset based in prayer and discernment. And so we'll talk about all that too. A lot of you, I think, have been with us for previous webinars and are a little bit familiar with our approach, and some of you might be new, and I want to welcome you guys and hope that you find this to be helpful. One thing that we were talking about, I still see some people joining, so we'll just wrap up introductions here in a minute and then we'll get started. One thing that we were all talking about preparing for this webinar is just how the social distancing, quarantine, and coronavirus have really been an opportunity to reflect on how do we understand God's providence in our lives. And that's really foundational to a worldview of stewardship and a mindset of how everything that we have is a gift from God. And so in some ways, while this maybe have set us back a lot in what our plans were for this year or what we were hoping to accomplish with our ministries, it's also an invitation and an opportunity to grow deeper in trust in God's plan, and that's what we're trying to also help our folks at our churches to grow in an understanding and embracing of. So with that, it looks like we have most of our folks in here, so we'll go ahead and get started. I'll introduce, share this webinar. We do love sharing what we've learned over 30 years of church stewardship work. We've done a lot of research on what works and what doesn't, and the links to the slides and their video recording will be sent to you in about 24 hours after the webinar. So, take notes as you need to, but also know that you'll have access to this afterwards. And we do find it to be way more engaging and fun when we hear from you what's going on in your church communities, what challenges are you facing, what successes are you finding with your efforts. And so any of those things, chime in on the chat or ask a Q&A question in your Zoom menu. There's a button for Q&A, and Dennis and Darryl, our presenters today, will answer your questions. And then just a little introduction about church development. So as I said, we've been doing this work for about 30 years. We're based in research and faith, and we do church capital campaigns. That's our business, and stewardship is our ministry. We've raised millions of dollars for hundreds of churches all across the country, and as I said, our approach is based in stewardship and an understanding of God's gifts, and not in pressure and pushing people to do something that's not in their best interest. So we see a lot of success with growth in our capital campaign gains, but also in our annual stewardship campaigns. We usually watch those increase even during a church capital campaign. That's something that people are often really surprised to hear, but when you're doing this work well and engaging people and getting them plugged into their communities, they start to really value the role of the church in their lives. So with that, I am going to introduce our host for today, Denis Greene, President of Church Development, and thanks, and take us away, Denis.
Thank you so much, Meredith. It is a pleasure to hear you so eloquently review what church development is all about. And I don't want to brag about the benefits of being old, but there seems to be one singular benefit, and that is you got a ton of experience. So I'm thinking church development might have been around since before Meredith was even born, which is conceivable. And then when you put Darryl and me together, I think our experience equates a multiple of that. But between Darryl and I think we've got about 50 or 60 years experience. And the other church development team members, Meredith, I think, has been with us for 5 years. And you add everybody else up, it's more than 100 years of experience. And I feel very blessed to be part of this work. I've made so many friends. It's how I met my wife. It has it's been very challenging through the years, and we are research based. We're based in our belief system, and I really enjoy being an active church member. It's a big part of my life, but that's augmented, like St. Augustine said, the balance of faith and reason is very important. And so we borrow everything that we can from the secular world, and I've even had some of my research published in the International Journal of Innovation, Education, and Research. I know that makes you think immediately, boring nerd. Well, you're right. My wife reminds me I can go from 0 to boring 2.7 seconds. So to make it lively and interesting, I got my coworker Darryl Prater, who's much more interesting than I am and has many more stories as well. So I'll be relying on him. In the sports world, they would say color commentary. So Darryl Prater, over to you, my friend.
Okay, Denis, thank you very much. It's great to be on the webinar today. I've been in church ministry all of my adult life. From 1987 to 2005, I served churches in the Midwest and in the South as full-time associate pastor. And for the past 15 years, I've been involved in stewardship, planning, leading, facilitating capital campaigns. And I'm beginning my 14th year with Denis and church development. Like Denis and Meredith, I love this work, very passionate about it. I love it because we don't necessarily strictly tell churches what to do, but we facilitate them into making great choices, usually based on our best practices and our experience. And so we, in a lot of ways, have a front row seat in what God is doing around the country in a variety of churches, large, medium, and small. And excited today to be able to talk to you about how our message is the same. It's just a little bit different now with getting the message out with a variety of technology. So glad you're attending today, and I'm glad to be a part of the panel.
Right, so please, you all, click on that Q&A button or the chat button. Ask questions as we go. It's going to be more interesting. We can tailor our remarks. And between us, we really do have a couple $100 million of experience. And we want to share that with you. That's one of the greatest joys of doing this work. We try to give everything we have learned about church capital campaigns, annual stewardship campaigns, and I feel extraordinarily benefited by what Darryl just said, to have a ringside seat at spectacular successes. I'm just concluding June 30th, believe it or not, the most successful annual campaign I have ever been involved in my life. And I'm shocked at the quality of the staff and the leadership of this annual campaign. It's just kind of blown my mind, and it's just been in the middle of COVID. So I feel very lucky, and Darryl has just had one of those too, a growth in giving of 10%. Tell me if I'm wrong, Darryl, but around 10%, just fiscal year end, just like it doesn't make any sense, but it still happens. So we'll share those best practices with you, both from the church world and from the secular world. And we take everything we can from the secular world and share it, from behavioral science research to fundraising techniques, by leading edge, world famous, highly successful scientific organizations. And we'll share all that with you. Okay, so we've got a bunch of free materials for you. These downloadable guides and samples are yours for free at our website, church-development.com. We give it all away. Take it, modify it, use it as yours. We created it so that it could be modified easily. And every year we have a new annual campaign system ready with new and different materials. It'll be coming out in about a month. Every year we do this. It's yours for the taking. Take it, change it. It usually gets a 10% increase in annual giving. And I'm hoping that this year it's going to be more than 10% for you, because we've kind of put a turbo on it by the technological applications that we're going to be serving up to you today. So you can go to church-development.com. It's got everything you need, from a manual, checklist, calendar, letters, templates, everything you need except the humans. And that's the magic sauce, of course. Now, the first thing I want to do is kind of differentiate between stewardship and fundraising. It's not exactly like fundraising. It's based in Scripture, 1 Peter 4:10, which says, like good stewards of the manifold grace of God, serve one another with whatever gift each of you has received. Now, my mom was a career counselor in a college for a long time, for 25 years, and she would walk 4 miles a day getting there and back. She's just hero material. And this is a core concept for human happiness, just to figure out how God has blessed you and how you can be a conduit for God's blessings. The secular research that supports that comes from a gentleman named Seligman, who wrote a book titled Flourishing, which is kind of a takeoff on Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. I'm probably saying his name wrong. He's an Eastern European professor at the University of Chicago. Brilliant person, but he coined the term flow. And flow is when you can figure out how to be that conduit of your natural gifts and your natural blessings. So it's not taking in and keeping, but it's rather being a flow, being in the here and now. And that's phenomenal how it changes your biology as well. The average Catholic gives 1.2% of their income to their church. The average Protestant gives 2.2%. The spectacular increase in the immune system response to generosity kicks in at 2%. So the minute you are giving more than 2% of your income away to the charity that is congruent with your values, hopefully it's your church, we can measure the T cell production increase in your immune system. Isn't that interesting? I love it where science intersects with human experience. I think that's just fascinating. So COVID has dealt us a pretty wicked blow. It has changed our ability to interact, this gigantic social distancing wall, but it has not changed our need for interaction. So the question is, how can we run a campaign in accommodating this big, ugly wall that keeps us apart? And the answer really lies in understanding the member needs that exist and how we might accommodate them. So that disconnection from others kind of has a negative impact on that sense of purpose, because there is a science that connects us. There really is. Our belief, churches are communities, they're dynamic living organisms. And we've got to figure a way to facilitate that. In Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl talked about the people who survived concentration camps were the ones that had that sense of connection with others and a higher sense of purpose. So the solution is we've got to be very deliberate about information, social connection, giving them back a sense of control, and as Meredith said so eloquently earlier, an awareness of God's providence. How this is not the end of the world. We just need to keep our attitudes up and keep moving forward. That's the key. This too shall pass. So a couple questions for you to ponder. Why do people give? Think about that for your own personal experience. And then we ratchet it up. Why do people give generously? Okay. And it's in the nuance between those two questions where we find dramatic improvements. They generally give because they're asked, but they give generously based on these 3 components that are within the 7 components of the stewardship system. And how does giving shift from being transactional to being part of somebody's spiritual journey? Well, let's dig in. And Darryl, I'm going to count on you to illuminate each one of these subjects with a story or anecdote from your wealth of experience. Okay, so number one, we've got to teach this concept of stewardship, about God's blessings flowing through us. Now, in the pre-COVID days, this was done on Sunday, and in the bulletin. So now we've got to double down. And there's a very fascinating thing that's happened in the world of video communication in churches. Okay, the old days we had two different parameters. The outer parameter was a 3-minute video, and the norm was 1 minute or less. Since COVID descended, we now can send out videos that are more than 20 minutes long, and people will actually watch them. And I think that's because of the isolation. So I say even a weekly video blog being sent out is a very good thing. We can email out the bulletins. For a younger set within your group, it's got to be text-based, okay? So when we are emailing out, we know the age stratification that is comfortable with that. With younger than middle age, it's got to be bite-sized bits, text more frequently, okay? We're going to use the same basic content, which is stories by volunteers. So Darryl, tell me, what have you used successfully in teaching stewardship using modern day technology in light of COVID?
Sure. Well, a couple of things. First, Our Lady of Lourdes is a Catholic parish, inner city, Atlanta, Georgia. We used Father Jeffrey Ott, their pastor, to send out a variety of videos where he might have mostly text in a newsletter or a link to go to a larger text that he would write. He would give updates on how the church was doing financially. We just finished a video where he was saying, in spite of COVID-19, we were able to do these capital improvements with over and above gifts that you all have given since the first of the year. And so that was really an update plus a thank you for your generosity. He also had some bite-sized stewardship related messages that were really point on to what Denis was talking about as far as the difference between fundraising and stewardship, and the idea that Meredith mentioned that really everything that we have comes from God. So we used a lot of that. We did use some mass text messages to a younger group, and we used some graphically designed images with less text for the group of probably about 20s to 30s. So, but we relied heavily on video from Father Jeffrey, and we've gotten good feedback because we asked for feedback in surveys and from what church leaders were hearing. So we know that has been effective.
Yeah, and I have to throw in, Father Ott's kind of a rock star. He's gentle and quiet, but he's just got this glowing personality that's maybe one of the most lovable people I've ever met in my life. So that would help if you can flip a switch and be glowing and lovable. I know my family would like it if I could take a magic pill and become lovable. Hadn't happened yet. So he might be an unfair example, but they've had a $158,000 increase in their year-end fiscal year ask. Now remember, you've got 4 asks per year that you're really allowed, and your annual campaign is one, but you've also got a special ask in that list. You know, you got your annual, your special, your year-end, and capital. Those are kind of the normal 4 asks. And let me tell you that, Darryl, you and Father Ott put together a home run with that $158,000 June 30th ask. You guys are miracle workers. Okay, so let's shift gears. Do you got something else to say, Darryl?
I was going to say that's going to be updated this week, so I feel confident that we'll be well over $200,000 because it's gone up really weekly. So and those started as letters, and then they were followed up by a video from Father Ott that just really kind of drove the point home, but in a very warm, pastoral kind of grace-filled message. So
Yeah.
really, really good feedback on that.
That's awesome. And now tell me again, isn't their annual giving around 1.1?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
about 1.1 million. Yeah.
Right. So I mean, at the moment they're up 10%, and if you're saying if they hit 200, they'll be up, better than 10%. That's pretty spectacular.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Now I want
Right.
to use that example again in principle number 2, involving people in decision making, because I feel like you've done a superb job with, in the old days you have a town hall meeting after church, but now we can't do that. But Zoom, which is based in Kansas City, right by Darryl's house, I understand, we can have Zoom meetings for just very few, up to more than 100, and you've done that numerous times. Am I right?
That's right. Yep.
And it works out well.
Recently, we had it's actually an advisory committee, and it was a group of between 50 and 75, so about the size of the group here today. I think there's about 75 on this webinar, but more in a Zoom setting where you could see everyone and interact a little bit differently. And even though we missed the in-person meeting and that sort of community and fellowship, we got a lot done and people felt connected. We used the chat feature for questions. We were able to use the poll feature to weigh in on graphics. Which of these do you like best to represent the campaign? And folks were able to be heard, to be listened to, and we got a lot accomplished.
Darryl, congratulations on that. That's pretty spectacular. Before we go to the next bullet, let me answer a question from a pastor that just popped up on the Q&A screen. Where can I find the 7 steps of the stewardship system? And we're going to walk through those 7 right now, but if you'd like a great deal of detail, just send me a note. I'll send you our book, and it covers those 7 points, and it covers it in tremendous detail as well, and I'll just send it to you for free. And the information, our website is at the end of this slideshow. So let me go back up to, there we go, involving people in decision making. Now we know that this is one of the key parts of simulating generosity. So Zoom meetings is one. We would like the pastor to be very deliberate. I got a question earlier from an esteemed denominational leader who's helping to train up a new pastor. And she asked for what are the key points where I can help bring that person up to speed. And I would say be super direct and say, look at your giving records, find out who your donor lists are from top to bottom, and then just be very deliberate in contacting personally. Call, starting from the top and working your way all the way through. And it's real important when you contact them, ask them a question so that the pastor is seeking advice and input from members. That's the best possible way to engage folks. So step number 1, engage from the top down. Darryl did this with an annual campaign in Lenexa, and that stimulated what % increase in their annual giving? And this was right before a capital campaign. Darryl, what was your number?
This was Holy Trinity Parish in Lenexa, Kansas. They did an annual stewardship campaign, as Dennis said, before engaging in a capital campaign. They had an increase of 20% in their annual stewardship. Now that's in front of the backdrop of going into their 4th debt reduction campaign, from building really a master plan and then paying it off with several debt campaigns. So that 20% annual stewardship increase was right in the middle of pretty heavy debt campaign fatigue. So and that really set the stage. Go ahead.
If I might interrupt and brag about Darryl, he hit such a home run, and a 20% increase in annual offertory is spectacular. But even better, the debt campaign that concluded right before we started ours, run by a different firm, they raised $2 million, And then Darryl's capital campaign raised 3.5 million. Same pastor, same church, same giving, same economy, saving everything. But it's through these 7 steps of the stewardship system, Darryl increased giving to a capital campaign by about 75%. That's why I worship Darryl. He is the rock star of church. Well, we can all agree on that.
So Dennis, the involvement in the decision making with the annual stewardship campaign that we were referring to began with some wealth screening to help us to know who were potential large donors in the church.
Yeah.
And then we had a series of weeks of lunches with the pastor, and they were just very informal. 2 questions: what would you like to see changed about the church, and what is working well? And it really gained a lot of momentum. And then that engagement and involvement continued as we rolled into the capital campaign. And so that was some great continuity that we were able to see. And it really began to take this church out of the debt fatigue that they'd experienced from previous capital campaigns.
That's great, Darryl. Now I'm going to ask you a question that just popped up on my Q&A screen. What do you do if your pastor is completely disengaged, but he will not allow others to take the lead? And I'm just going to bet Darryl's answer is going to be pray. Okay, so yes, you got to do that. But in terms of concrete terms, I have had this experience many, many times. So Darryl and I are consultants. We are paid. We are experts. And the most compelling thing we can say to a pastor and back it up with data and references, we say to them, if you allow us to implement the stewardship system, your annual giving will increase substantially. And at that point, they say, well, really? And then the next thing we say is, here are 10 phone numbers of other pastors in your denomination that you may call to verify that. And sometimes they do, and then they say, well, okay, if it worked for them, it will probably work for me. So I'm sorry you're having that experience, but it is a fairly common one. Okay, so let's finish up on number 2. Involving people in decision-making can be extremely quick and efficient. SurveyMonkey, one of my favorite tools. You can get we have it. It's cost me about $300 a year for the upgraded version. You can get a free version of that. You can survey people once a month on different subjects. It is a way for you to gather information and then you can feed it back. I like the next one, personalized video, BombBomb. You have to pay for that as well, but it allows me to create a video. I look in the camera and I can say, hi, Darryl, Dennis here. Wish I could be there with you in person, but I want to share with you this information and I'd like your input. So I can do a 20-second video. It only takes about 25 seconds to click, make the video, click, and send it. It's so technologically friendly, it is spectacular. Now, the second to the last bullet, weekly video, I really would like you to do this. I would like you to have your pastor share information. And when you have a challenge, ask for input. This is your way of setting up the SurveyMonkey as well. Your brochures and information should be on the website and emailed out. But anytime you can involve people in decision making, please do that. All right, so now let me shift to the next slide. Oh, there we go. Engaging people as volunteers. This is particularly challenging. And you see in bold underline there, Zoom is your best friend. So set up volunteer teams that are under the basic framework of episodic volunteer opportunity, okay? Not standing teams, but episodic. So we want them to be short-term, almost one and done. So when you're setting up your annual campaign for the fall, 2 or 3 or 4 committees, not a whole lot. And it's easy to ask who might be involved by doing a survey. Do your SurveyMonkey survey and just ask people. And describe each committee and say what they would be doing, and then say, click here. This committee will meet 2 times, or this committee will meet 3 times. And here's their responsibility. Here are their tasks. Believe it or not, we have had the most magnificent success recruiting people for the ambassador teams. We say, your job is to call people. Now, my coworker Meredith said, as we were preparing for this webinar, she said, I would have loved that if somebody from my church had called me after a month of not going to church, just to check in. Well, we had a church in Long Island that just did that one thing. They had a calling team just to call to check in. Giving went up by 16%, just based on that human contact, the old-fashioned phone call. Sometimes I think my children don't even know how to use the phone. All they do is this all day long. But it makes a huge difference because it's a human contact. So we want to engage people as volunteers. And the bottom line criteria that we have discovered in running a church capital campaign is that an active volunteer will give 11 times more than a non-volunteer. So we want to find ways to make volunteering easy and fun. So the key is to have a facilitator, someone who's good at group management with each one of these volunteer teams. Okay? Set up teams, have a facilitator, make it easy, make them episodic. Okay? Now, Darryl, am I missing anything? What else would you like to throw in here, buddy?
Well, when you were talking about the church and that made phone calls just to check in, that reminded me of a church that we were involved in the beginning of a capital campaign earlier this year. And then because of the pandemic, we had to push the pause button, but we didn't want the energy and the momentum of the church to diminish. And so we did some involving leaders in decision-making and came up with a plan of, well, let's repurpose these teams that have episodic volunteer opportunities. So one of those teams was what we call the ambassador team. And that team did phone calling. It was a team of about 40 or 50 volunteers, and they each took about 20 household names, family names, and called them. The script was laid out, basically, how are you coping right now? So this was mid-March through about mid-June, if you will. And also, do you have the necessities to live on right now? And so we captured that, and we also had some supportive websites if they needed food or shopping or medicine, those kind of things. We had a plan to be able to help them if they had those needs. We then asked them, is there anything that, are you able to watch the church service live on Sunday and be a part of fellowship Zoom meetings? And if they needed help, we could provide them with some simple instructions with screenshots, and those could be contacted by the communications team, another one of the campaign teams. So anyway, we gathered a lot of information. We also said, how long have you been a member of the church or an attendee? And give us your most updated email address. So we kind of took advantage of kind of a well thought out script, and it really was a good point, a lot of good feedback.
Excellent. Well, Darryl, it works. You just have to make it happen. The key is have an agenda, have a facilitator, and do something. That's the key to success. Okay, let's move to item number 4 in the stewardship system, 7 points. Connecting people socially. This is such a phenomenon that George Barna, the renowned church researcher, has made the bold assertion. People go church shopping. He's the one that coined the term church shoppers. They go church shopping and make their selection based not upon theology, but on community. Isn't that interesting? So no longer do we make geographic-based church selections. We go based on that unmet social need. Remember Maslow's hierarchy of need? The social need has eclipsed theology at this point, which I am sort of shocked to discover. But we've got to respect that. The book Bowling Alone was written about this phenomenon, the unmet social needs. And I think it might have gotten worse since the texting generation has arrived. There's very little, there's less human interaction because of digital communication. So we've got to create social connecting opportunities before and during your campaign. So one of the things Darryl helped set up was on a Wednesday, and I can't remember what the name of that was, but it was a happy hour on Wednesday night. Am I right, Darryl?
That's right. And the church decided to call it Wind Down Wednesday. That's W-I-N-D, Down Wednesday. And they had it structured for an hour as a Zoom meeting. I believe it was from 6 to 7. And it was a fairly loose agenda, but it was an opportunity for fellowship, community interaction. There was a facilitator that just kind of kept things moving along, but it helped sort of fill the gap of not having that interpersonal, in-person type of community that we experience that's so rich in our churches. And so we've had a growing group of attendees. We're doing that once a month now at this church. And actually we have more than one church doing it. We just call it something different in the churches. But that's been a good thing.
That's great. So we want to find ways, we want to generate opportunities. One of my favorites is a brilliant woman in Batavia, Illinois, Methodist pastor, created online Bible study, and it evolved to book study. So it started out scripturally based and then went to commentaries, like Man's Search for Meaning might have been one of their books, I can't remember, but deeply spiritual in nature. But it became a topic and a way to coalesce people around a theme so that they could interact socially as well as growing spiritually. Now I want to go back. That last bullet is a pretty big one. Darryl talked about that earlier, the ambassador team making phone calls. It just, one cannot understate, or one cannot overstate how important that is. So that regular human contact is vital. And my mom is 91 years old, and she just needs that just all the time. So we are all constantly checking in with mom. That's a big deal to her. All right, let's move on to number 5. Prayer and discernment. So we want the decision to give to be based in that internal reflection. It's between the individual and God, and we don't want to exert a whole lot of pressure. So you're having online worship. That is an opportunity the pastor can teach about prayer and discernment. So that's going to happen. But beyond that, we even suggest that you create a video in which your pastor or other people teach about the subject. I remember going to my first class on discernment many years ago, and it just helped my interior life a great deal to know that there is a tried and true sequence. And then that turned me on to a book called The Ladder of Divine Ascent, written in the year 600 AD by the abbot of the monastery of Sinai, who was an elderly person at that point, but had observed people over many decades in this monastery. And it talks about, well, this has worked for other people. You might try it for yourself. So that teaching can be done. People do gather that in, absorb it, and then they implement it in their life. We want to go old school as well as the new school video. We want to mail out a prayer and discernment booklet. And maybe it's a little bitty thing. I've got something about that size that would be just, 8.5 by 11, folded in half, 14-day prayer and discernment guide, just to walk through with us some scripture, a story, and then a question to reflect upon. Now, a really cool thing that I've seen churches do is set up a specific time where from noon to 1 on Sunday, we're all going to be praying this particular prayer together. So even though we're apart, we're going to be all praying together at the same time. It really works. People have that sense of connectedness. It's a wonderful thing. And then the last one, SurveyMonkey could augment the phone calls when you ask people, what are your spiritual needs? What are your prayer requests? And you can gather them together. That's a very powerful way of connecting with people. So Darryl, anything else that you would add about the prayer and discernment?
Right. I may just piggyback on your last comment, Dennis. We recently worked with a church where they did ambassador calls, like I mentioned, and then about 8 weeks after that, they followed it up with a parish-wide survey that had 5 questions And included in that, one of the questions was, you know, how are you doing? So it was sort of like, we know how you were doing 2 months ago. How are you doing today? And then it also had some more private information that we said only the pastor will see this. Is your job unchanged? Are you furloughed? Are you laid off? Have you had a reduction in pay? And really that was not for the finances of the church. It was more so the pastor could follow up and offer pastoral care to those people if they were in a place where they wanted that. So it was kind of an extension from the ambassador calls. Now, moving to the next, to the topic of prayer and discernment, we have a church that recently did an online prayer service. They did it via Zoom. It was 30 minutes long. And so it began with some gathering music. And so actually one of the prayer team co-leaders played keyboard, was very gifted at improvisation and playing familiar hymns and songs of the church. And so he had some of that music kind of intermittent through the body of that prayer service, scriptures, a time to voice prayer requests that would be then given to the prayer team and the pastor to pray for, and then just spaces in that 30 minutes to just offer prayers kind of guided by specific subjects. So that proved really to be, wasn't the same as being in person, but I would say it was 85% as strong as that. So it was a really good replacement. And also the prayer team during this time, they wrote a specific prayer. They called it Prayer in Crisis. And it came out to the church about the end of March. So it was very timely, and it helped voice some of the thoughts and feelings to God that we were feeling at that time. Very, very, very poignant prayer.
Okay, that's fantastic, buddy. So you're doing such a good job. I had a question pop up from Ron that says, do you have a sample prayer and discernment guide we could use? Yes. Send me an email. I'll just send you a template.
Yeah.
You can take the one Darryl talked about, and we've got. Tell you what, send me an email. We'll send you a couple of them. Okay. And then I got another.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Dennis, but we have some that are geared more toward Catholic parishes. We have some that are geared more toward Protestant churches. So we've got a variety of these prayer guides.
Yeah. So just let us know a little bit about yourself, and we can send you something to be pretty close to. Only take a little bit of modification for you to use. Okay, got another question to pop up. How do you think the new CARES Tax Act will benefit stewardship and capital campaigns this summer and fall? That's a really good question. So when this descended in March, or January, when I had this foreboding, and I was afraid and I was very worried. But what I've seen happen is a counterintuitive thing. I mean, the successes that Darryl has talked about are real, that we have had dramatic increases during COVID, and it's just counterintuitive. You'd think so many people are out of work, and the stock market took a pretty big hit. It's starting to rebound back now, but unemployment is still high, and there's a lot of fear and the isolation and tension. And maybe what it is that people are so hungry for this very deliberate system of engagement that we're talking about here. And that they're no longer overwhelmingly busy, and they might be open to a Zoom meeting, for instance, that Darryl just talked about. That is a presentation of a prayer activity in which they can be engaged, not just for their interior life, but connecting with other people there. So perhaps they're less busy and they're more open. And maybe the evidence of that is the phenomenon of we see people watching a lot more longer videos as well. So maybe they're hungry, they are open, but we know Gallup polling a couple of years ago did a fascinating survey on what's your ceiling for giving, the max people are most comfortable with, and it seems to be about 5% of one's income per year. That's the ceiling. Now, tradition has settled in. The average Catholic, as I said earlier, gives 1.2%. The average Protestant gives 2.2%. So how do we move from 1 or 2% up to that 5%? And these methods that we're talking about really do seem to work. You know, it's phenomenal. This spectacular science group I've been doing some work with, they just mounted an effort to contact everybody, and they're amongst their thousands of donors that they have. Just the human contact seemed to really stimulate. Now, admittedly, they're a brilliant group of people doing landmark research, and so they're kind of Nobel Prize worthy in my mind. But it's the human contact that really seems to make the biggest difference. So it's a little bit old school. It's a little bit simple. We just are going to use technology to facilitate that further engagement. So that's a really good question. Keep those questions coming. We've only got 2 points left, and then we're done. Now, number 6 is you have to ask for a pledge. That must occur. So we encourage you, go old school, still do the mailing. Mail a letter, brochure, pledge card out, follow it up, and email out the same exact things as well. And then the next thing we're going to say in the near future is you got to text those things out as well. So most churches do not have a good phone number component to their database. So we've all got to be working on that. But texting is upcoming. A friend of mine, a superb professional fundraiser, her name is Michelle, has been an advocate for text to give for quite some time. And she's just kind of brilliant because that is the future, and we've all got to get there. So that's coming up. So you're going to, the next thing you have to do at this point, and I say that fervently, is you're going to have to email out your ask video. Okay, and this is one that I don't think you should make it too long. It should be done by your pastor. It should be straight to the point. Just look, have your pastor look at the camera and state the ask and say, look, I need your help. You got a pledge card in the mail. Now's the time to state your intention. Please pray and discern your way through that, but we really need you to step in right now. It seems to ask. Now, to personalize that, there is a service that I like a lot. BombBomb is the name. You see it in the small type there. You can go get a free 2-week trial. Doesn't cost anything, but it'll allow you to click and send a personalized email. And I would suggest that your pastor do that to as many people as they humanly can, starting from the top, most active, most generous people, as far through the congregation as they could possibly go. I myself, I've gotten pretty good at it, so I can do 1 or 2 of those per minute. So in an hour, it's conceivably they could knock out 50 or more. And if your church is like my church, you know, the key group of active people is not that big. So I'm going to recommend BombBomb. I'm not the salesman. I get no remuneration, but I really like that personalized video. Now, you got to have the brochure, letter, and pledge card on the website so that a person can click and get it. Now, the pledge card in particular, I would really hope that it becomes automated so I can fill it out and submit it on screen and not just click a PDF and print it and mail it. Most people want to do it online and make it interactive. Now, after the mail out, after the video, before your Commitment Sunday date, I recommend that your ambassador team call all members to answer questions. And that's their script. We will provide you a script. When we do a church capital campaign, it's a detailed script with a bunch of questions. Same with an annual stewardship campaign. It's give them a script to make it easy, and it's super gentle. I'm just calling to see if you got the packet, calling to see if you got any questions. I'm on the ambassador team. They're going to leave a lot of messages. Leave your phone number. Never call somebody and not leave a message. They just think you're a weirdo if that happens. So call and leave a message. We'll give them a script, and we can, if you want one, just give me a call. I think we've also got it on our resource page. But if you don't find it there, just send me an email. But that human contact is just extraordinarily important. And we want to set up a Commitment Sunday so that there is a deadline, so people know now is the time to ask. Now I want to turn over to Darryl and just talk for 30 seconds, Darryl, on the superhero Father Jeffrey Ott. Did more than one ask video in his end of the fiscal year ask. And
right,
by the way,
right.
You know, 150,000 in this one, and then he's going to do a fall stewardship campaign, and I'm betting it's going to be a minimum of another 150,000, probably a $200,000 increase. So over these 2 asks over a 7-month period, he's going to get an additional $300,000 or $400,000. You know, when I think of that, I just think, you know, it's not magic. It's doable. You can do this. And he's going to get a $400,000 bump. And I think he's going to be happy. So anyway, Darryl, talk about the different segments, the multiple videos
Sure.
that you sent out.
So Father sent, we drafted 4 letters for Father. He edited those letters, mailed them out, and then a follow-up video, one based on each of those 4, were e-blasted out as about a week later follow-up to each of those letters. The different segments would depend on your church, who they would go to, but in this church, they went to parents who go to Sunday school and have children or youth. Another one was online givers. Another one was those who give by loose check or cash. And then there was another group that can't remember which one that was, but there were four different groups. And then after about 2 weeks, they had gotten about 75,000. About 3 weeks ago, they were up to about 158,000, and now we're looking to be over 200,000. So again, as Dennis said, the videos just need to be warm and a follow-up from the letter. We've created some talking points for Father Jeffrey based on the letter, but we scaled it down some because that could easily be a 2 or 3 minute video. So just be aware of how much verbiage you have. And of course, hopefully your pastor has a lot of warmth and personality and is loved, and that will really make that message very, very open and receptive to the parishioners.
Yeah, that's great. You know, we in the chat box, we had a really interesting story from Dan, who has really used the recent challenges as an opportunity to bring his congregation together for dialogue. And I would say that's a stroke of brilliance. So he created a discussion group called Race and Grace, which has turned into a pretty big online group. And he said he's a predominantly pretty white congregation, and folks want to learn from people of color and their stories. So I'm just quoting from his comment in the chat box. I think that's kind of a good idea. Dialogue, learning, because we are faith communities, and that's kind of what we ought to be doing. So kudos to you. That's a great way to socially connect and uplift people with a significant spiritual component as well. Here's a tough question from Dan. Have you ever worked with a church to do an extended year pledge, 15-month, in order to jumpstart higher giving commitments sooner? Yes, we have. And I don't know if you need to do it. Give me a call, Dan, and we can talk about this. But just going back to something we talked about earlier, you can do 4 asks per year. And I kind of think Father Jeffrey Ott is kind of brilliant because he did this year-end, this fiscal year-end. And the science group I'm working with, they did a fiscal year-end. And that sense of urgency really seems to stimulate generosity. So you got 4 asks per year. And in the study of the subconscious decision-making process, we know that it should not be the same ask every time. So there are visual, auditory, and kinesthetic components for each of your asks. So if you have a capital ask because the organ broke, that's a whole different way of thinking. Remember, the average person gives to 5 different charities. If they're a churchgoer, the biggest gift every year, even if it's weekly gifts, goes to their church. And that's about half of all their giving. And then they have 4 other churches. So, or 4 other nonprofit organizations that they give to. So when you do a special ask, the year-end ask, there's a bit of a bifurcation in the donor's thinking. I'm going to give this amount set every week to my church. And then when other interesting things pop up, I'll give to that as well. So repaving the parking lot, new roof on the church, the organ, a special ask, or the fiscal year-end ask, that's kind of in competition with those other 4, but not in competition with the annual giving. So I would encourage you to take a year-round stewardship view and plan your 4 asks out very deliberately. I say that because it works. Okay, so Darryl and I have helped hundreds of churches raise hundreds of millions of dollars. And at almost every church, somebody says, well, we're all giving as much as we can. We can't possibly give more. And then 6 months later, we have basically facilitated the doubling of their giving for the next 3 years. So our norm is to shoot for raising 3 times annual giving and 3-year pledges in a church capital campaign. So an economist would call this elasticity. We know it is possible. So it's up to you. Now we can help you and we'll do it for free just to coach your way through. Call us or email with any questions. It is possible and it works. You just have to do these 7 things. All right, we're going to go to one last subject and then we're going to end. We're just a couple minutes away from conclusion. Number 7 is the best way to set up your next ask. Okay, so I want you to take this global multi-year view. It is good manners. It is respectful to thank people. From a fundraising perspective, this is the best cultivation activity for the next ask. By far, the most effective way to thank people is old school, a handwritten note. I remember working at St. Elizabeth's Parish, and they had a new stewardship director, and every week she would bring in 5 thank you notes to the pastor and say, here's a yellow sticky, here's what to thank him for. I'll wait while you write the notes. Well, just based on those thank you notes, giving went up 7% over the next 6 months. So we know that it works. So old school, handwritten. Next, pastor, video. And if you can get somebody else to pay for it, do a gift of some kind. And my favorite one is a Christmas tree ornament in the shape of the church. I like the 10 things I'm thankful for. Darryl, talk about that.
Yes, a thank you team came up with 10 things that they were thankful for. And then our graphic designer put those 10 things in about a half-page word collage. So they were easy to read. They were kind of interwoven. And so that was presented out to the parish in one of their e-blasts. And then they're in the process now of following up with about a 30-second, 45-second video that would have a parishioner highlighting each of those weekly. So it would be 10 different parishioners highlighting those. And so that kind of brings out a little bit more of the meaning in a personal way. Very, very effective.
That's great. So I want to kind of move towards conclusion, but what you really need to think of yourself as an organizational development consultant, a servant, a facilitator, as it were. Now I even want to take a big leap here. We had a question pop up about how does this scale up to a diocesan, a denominational level, and that's a brilliant question, and that's a good segue into our next workshop. Will be on the 29th, and will be just about that. How we want to serve diocesan and denominational leaders as they seek to serve the churches that are under their care, and just the fact that you're asking that questions mean you're probably going to be a success. So we are members of ICSC, the International Catholic Stewardship Council, and NACBA, the National Association of Church Business Administrators. And that's their concern as well. So we try to work with groups that assist denominational leaders by providing resources. And for us, it's terrifically fun. Now, what you can do, like let's say you want to have a webinar like this for your diocese, it works out fantastic because you get this cross-pollination, where people share. So we walk through the principles and then we flash up examples from different parishes within the congregation, and there becomes this sharing of what works. And for us, it's a joy to be a facilitator, because then we see everybody's giving goes up by 10%, just based on the sharing of best practices. So if we can help you do that, give me a call. Give me a call or send me a note, and I can share with you both some ICSC resources or NACBA or the resources that we have done. Okay, last question before we conclude. We received a PPP grant, how to share that with our parishioners. And I would be fairly direct, and I would be a little bit technical. And I would say, if officially this is a loan, officially this is not a gift. It might turn out to be a gift, but the bottom line that you need to communicate to your members is that we're safe, secure, solid, well managed. We have ridden out the storm. And I would never go all negative, and I would say, well, we have just barely avoided tanking. Don't say that. Say, look, we are doing well in spite of this horrendous pandemic. Nobody wants to give or be part of a sinking ship. Just let them know you're well managed and you're faithful, and you're continually to seek God's will in the mission and ministry of the parish. And we're well managed, okay? Go back to that over and over. So the final note, plan ahead. Here we are, July. So the normal annual campaigns are in October and November for a Commitment Sunday. You're going to need at least 3 months. Work backward from your Commitment Sunday. And again, we are available to you. This is our life work, is this stuff, and we think it's fun and it's really creative. Call me and Darryl, send us an email. We can really help. Last question. When a church has a big endowment and the congregation has begun to reduce their giving because of the endowment, what are the best practices? I'm going to go back to the very first thing that we talked about in the stewardship system, engaging people in decision making. If they own the decision, they will give to it. So I would constantly be engaging people in the decision making process and let them know we have big plans, and for us to implement those plans, we really need people to give more. So almost all of us give at a low level, and we could increase to the biblical invitation of 10%, or at the Gallup polling, scientific parameters of 5%. So most of us could increase our giving. It's really based on, is it you're giving me a sales pitch, or was the idea, did it come forth out of my lips? And if that's the case, people will give generously. Now, we've answered a lot of questions as we have gone. Our emails and phone numbers will be in this slideshow that we're going to send you in the next 24 hours. If we missed anything, please let us know. And on the 29th, same time, same location, we're going to present a webinar on how diocesan and regional denominational leaders can support their local congregations. And I remember when I was on my stewardship committee at my church for 10 years, we got very, very little. We got right at next to nothing from our denominational leaders. So we can talk about what do stewardship committees need and how can we deliver it to them and how we can help them grow in comfort. Now, I don't ever want to say it's a guarantee, but there is a high probability that everybody who participates in that is going to have a 10% increase in their annual giving. It just happens to us all of the time just by implementing these techniques. And sometimes, I'm not going to say most of the time, it's more than a 10% increase in the annual offertory. And I just say that because we're old and we have a ton of experience, and we kind of run out of things to fail at. You remember Chuck Norris's key to success, which is find out what doesn't work, then don't do that. Well, we've discovered these best practices by trial and error. So please, we hope to see you then on the 29th. Then we'll take the month of August off and vacate. Hopefully, I don't know where we're going to do it with social distancing. But thank you so much for joining us. And Darryl, thank you so much for your expertise today. So go forth. Sure. God bless. Good luck. Bye-bye.